Every year, 50 days after Easter, we celebrate Pentecost. It's the story we hear in Sunday school of the disciples in the upper room, the coming of the wind and the fire, the speaking in the tongues, that whole experience that goes on there. And sometimes we are so used to hearing the story that we no longer hear the story. We no longer get behind the story. We no longer get inside of it to see what's going on. So maybe we need to back up and unpack this story just a little bit to see what Luke is telling us about this experience that the disciples had. Not just the 12, but we're told 120 of them, men and women, in this place, all filled with the Holy Spirit. And it wasn't kind of a cognitive thing. It was an experience. St. Luke basically says it was like this. It was like a raging wind. It was like tongues of fire. It was like trying to explain how you feel about somebody when you love them deeply. How do you put that into words? So the disciples were trying to explain what that experience was like in the upper room when the Holy Spirit came upon them. It was something they experienced. It was something they could not really put into words. It was hearing Isaiah talking about his vision of God in the temple. It was like this, but not like it. But what goes on there is this story that has a history that goes back to the very beginning. This Holy Spirit we're talking about is not something new in the church. It was there in Genesis. It was the Spirit that brooded over the waters of chaos, as the Hebrew sort of seems to say, at creation. It was the Spirit that animated and gave life to all living creatures in creation. It was the Spirit that was there with the children of Abraham as they lived in Egypt and then later migrated with Moses in the Exodus. It's that same Spirit that gave new life to Jesus in the tomb and brought him forth in the resurrection. It's that same Spirit that now breathes life and creates the church and brings it into existence. It is that power of God that is with us day in and day out. It is that power that reminds us that what we captured, what we were given in that creation in the garden, which we lost through our fallenness, now comes back to us in the power of the Spirit. It is that recreation, that renewing that we have. And then, as part of the manifestation of that, we have the disciples now speaking in tongues or in languages to people in Jerusalem. And we hear about the Parthians and the Medes and the Elamites and all those people that lay readers love to read about on Pentecost. And everybody's hearing the story of Jesus in their own language. And St. Luke is telling us then that the message that began in Genesis, that was shared with Abraham as one man, that was expanded to one people in the Exodus with Moses, now embraces the world in Pentecost. Because all the people are going to hear the good news of Jesus in their own language. The church is growing and expanding, being led out into the world in many new and different and exciting places. So what we celebrate this day is not just that story of Acts. It's the whole story of creation and our place in it. The common language we lost at the Tower of Babel now has been renewed in the story of the good news, and the Spirit brings us to tell the story with all people. We are led forth as a new creation, if you will, to expand and to incorporate the entire world in the story of Jesus. So when we experience the Spirit, and we've all probably had that experience in some way, maybe we can't explain it. Maybe like Luke will say it was like this or it was like that. But we've all been there where we felt that stirring. We felt that leading, that tugging, if you will. Maybe not with fire and wind, but that silent tug to do this or do something like that. We realize it's the hand of God either pulling us or in many cases shoving us somewhere to do something. That's our experience of the Spirit. That's the experience that goes on through the whole church. We're all filled with this. It is ours to share and to pass on to other people. The promise of this is that we will, as Peter talks about, and he talks about the prophet Joel, we will see visions. We will see dreams. We will do greater works than these, as Jesus promised his disciples they would do, because they are infused with the Holy Spirit. Sometimes we lose touch with that. Sometimes we lose sight of the fact that it is the Spirit that animates the church. It is the Spirit that leads us forth in our mission. Sometimes we get caught up in thinking, well, it's all my job, or I have to do it, or Grace Church has to do it, or Western Kansas has to do it, or the Episcopal Church has to lead the way. Well, the Holy Spirit is very non-denominational, ecumenical. He calls all of us. And we're all led to dream dreams and to see visions and to work for the coming of the kingdom. It's that completion we're involved in. It's one that will come to fruition at the second coming. But right now we live in that power that we can't explain or understand or only experience sometimes. But it's one that leads us to proclaim the good news to the world, to go forth out of these walls and to share that with the people we encounter. So it's not just about wind and fire and tongues. It's about the Spirit that gives power and creation and renewal to each of us. The Spirit that calls us to go forth, to be his disciples, as he says, and in Jerusalem and Judea and all the world. We have to accept the Spirit as we already have, make it our own, and allow it to work in our souls and bodies to lead us out into the world in our callings. So today, as we celebrate the coming of the Spirit, we celebrate renewal, we celebrate recreation, we celebrate what we are called to be, the children of God who go forth in praise and glory to share the good news that we have with the Parthians and the Medes and the Elamites and anybody else we may encounter.